Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Price Check Sports Podcast brought to you by the In the Zone Network, where we go city to city, state to state, worldwide. Starting in the city, none other than Columbia, South Carolina today, as we have to congratulate the now undefeated national champion, South Carolina Lady Gamecocks, on a wonderful undefeated season, historic run for them, culminating in a national championship win yesterday over Iowa, 87-75 in the national championship game held in Cleveland, Ohio. An outcome that, of course, some of us predicted, some of us may not have predicted or have been hoping for, but all in all, gives us a great end to what has been an exceptional college basketball season for the women this year. You had, of course, South Carolina's Dawn Staley, the absolute GOAT, her third national championship since taking over South Carolina 8 years ago, their second national championship in the last 3 years. Of course, 2022, they won a little misstep against Iowa last year, but of course they get their revenge in this year's championship game. You had some great performances yesterday, of course. Camila Cardozo, absolute beast in the paint, 15 points, 17 rebounds. And then freshman Tessa Johnson, man, 19 points off the bench, some big threes that kept them in the first half, and of course helped them separate a little bit late in the game. Now, on the other side, you, of course, have Caitlyn Clark, who has been the standout star in college basketball on either the men's or women's side this year. She had a typical stat line for her: 30 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists. Now, the only difference is yesterday, not very efficient. She went 10 for 28 from the field, 5 for 13 from three-point range. Now, some people might put that on her not having a great game. South Carolina played excellent defense, especially after switching Raven Johnson onto her full time here about midway through the second quarter. So she started off lights out in that game, 18 points in the first quarter, not only solidifying herself as the top scorer in NCAA tournament history for the women, also giving her a record for first quarter points in a championship game, I believe. So, great performance, great season by Caitlyn, and great season by the Gamecocks. Again, Dawn Staley leading a hell of a team. They had a great game plan yesterday, taking advantage of their size and their depth. And Iowa just didn't have the bodies as we got, further and further into that game. You saw South Carolina start to pull away. So I do want to obviously touch on the fact that, social media has taken this out of proportion a little bit in terms of just the talk about Caitlyn, the reception that she's getting from WNBA players, former college players, men's players of all likes. We cannot discount the greatness of Caitlyn Clark with this loss. Caitlyn is an outstanding basketball player. She's going to continue to be an outstanding basketball player. But I feel like two things can also be true. Caitlyn can be great. She can be exceptional. She can have had a historic season. But we also need to make sure that we give South Carolina the love that they deserve for a historic season themselves. We saw, CNN initially put out their tweet yesterday congratulating South Carolina, but having Caitlyn Clark as like the thumbnail, as though it was like a celebration of her instead of South Carolina. So we want to make sure that none of this gets lost. We need to be celebrating all of these women in the season that they had, as opposed to, the constant comparisons and debates about whether or not, she's the greatest, or, people who come before her, if they're the greatest. None of that matters right now. What does matter is that we have had more eyes on women's college basketball this year, and we also need to translate that into having more eyes on the WNBA this upcoming season. So, saying my piece, I'm off my soapbox on that one. Congratulations to Dawn Staley and her team yet again on another historic season. Now, we also got some pretty crazy news out of men's college basketball last night. Of course, their championship game is happening tonight in Phoenix. You got UConn, you got Purdue. I already said my piece on this last week. I'm taking UConn, I'm taking the points. I don't really have much else to say on that matter. UConn's going to win the game tonight. Book it. If they lose, you can run this back as many times as you need to. UConn's win the game. Now, we're also going to kind of tie UConn into this next topic, but John Calipari is leaving Kentucky. He's been there 15 seasons. He is now accepting a 5-year deal to become the head coach of the University of Arkansas's basketball team. This is just major news because, one, John Calipari, some years back signed a lifetime deal with Kentucky, but also last week met with the athletic director where the athletic director came out and said that, John basically is safe. Now, essentially what that means is they had a talk. They probably told him this is going to be a 1-year thing, like you need to turn it around or you're done. And John just decided to go ahead and get his money elsewhere and go ahead and bow out gracefully. Now, where this, of course, affects Arkansas, they're getting a great head coach. Now, you can say he's a great regular season head coach, a great recruiter, in terms of what he's shown at Kentucky, especially in recent years, having just one national championship in the last 10 years. But we also have to note that he's going to be able to get players to Arkansas. This is an Arkansas team that's been good here under Eric Musselman, who kind of started this whole chain of events going and taking over, I believe, at USC after their coach ended up leaving here. So Eric Musselman out, John Calipari in at Arkansas. They're going to get players. They're probably going to win games. They're probably going to make some deep runs in the NCAA tournament. The bigger question to me, though, who now takes the head coaching job at Kentucky? Why I say this ties into UConn, because I do believe, of course, I don't have any sources, I'm not reporting anything, but I believe that if they're smart, Kentucky's probably flying out to Phoenix right now so that after tonight's game, they can go ahead and just walk over to Dan Hurley and say, hey, here's a blank check. Tell us the amount that you need. We want you as the head coach at Kentucky. Have no idea if Dan Hurley would be interested in that. Have no idea if that's even a topic of conversation right now for Kentucky. But I do think he's the best coach in college basketball right now on the men's side of things. You got to take your shot. You got to take your shot, especially if you want Kentucky to continue to live up to their name and that reputation of being one of the bigger brands in college basketball. You got to take a shot at Dan Hurley, and who knows, he might just go ahead and say yes. Connecticut or UConn, I'm sorry, has continued to establish themselves as a powerhouse now on the men's side of things, and it's in direct result of the work and the time that he's put in as their head coach. Kentucky needs somebody like that, not only that's going to have the name recognition themselves, but also that can actually duplicate, if not exceed, some of the things that John Calipari did in his 15 seasons there. So I don't know, again, if that's going to be the goal for Kentucky or if that's a goal of Dan Hurley's to leave UConn. But I do think if they're going to make a splash in terms of replacing Calipari, Hurley's probably your guy, especially given what UConn has showed us the last couple seasons and how just unstoppable they've truly been these last couple basketball seasons. So if of course the basketball worlds and stars align here, I think that could be a great hire for the University of Kentucky. Now, of course, got to switch gears to the NBA. We are in the final week of the NBA's regular season. A crazy, crazy season. A lot of movement with teams, a lot of movement with players. We've seen it all here this NBA season. Couple things that we need to be on the lookout for here as this season winds down to a close. Every team having about 3 to 4 games left to play this week. No action in the NBA tonight, of course, with the men's national championship game. Play will resume tomorrow. And you got a full slate of games a lot of these days throughout the week. So biggest thing, of course, right now is the standings and how they finally, shape out when it's all said and done in the Western Conference, specifically in the play-in. The Western Conference right now, of course, you got, Phoenix, New Orleans, Sacramento, the Lakers, Warriors in that 6 to 10 range. All of them separated by a couple games, maybe I guess with the exception of Golden State being about a half game or game behind the Lakers right now. There is a good possibility that when this is all said and done going into next week, we have a play-in that includes all three of Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Stephen Curry. If that does happen, at least one of them, if not multiple of them, will miss the playoffs. Kind of a big deal. If you have a playoffs that does not include at least one of Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Stephen Curry, major deal. So we have to see how these teams respond here in this final week. Now, the Suns, out of those three teams, probably has the toughest schedule. Of course, the Lakers, I think they play the Warriors tomorrow night. You got the Grizzlies as well as the Pelicans to wrap up the season. Suns, I know they've got back-to-backs against the Clippers, and I believe they also play the Kings again before the season's all said and done. So a lot of those teams are going to be matched up with each other. If I had to choose, I think, honestly, the Kings are probably one of my picks of teams to miss the playoffs They just don't have the guys off the bench anymore with Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter being out with injury. And De'Aaron Fox, as great as he's been most of the season, can have his nights of inefficient shooting. He can have the nights of going 7 of 23 from the field. So not necessarily sold on the Kings. Also, they don't play great defense as it is. So being shorthanded and not having that same offensive firepower, definitely not great for them. The Suns, I haven't loved what I've seen from them either. So, again, great chance that one of those guys, one of those major stars that we've had in this league for, the last 15 to 20 years, one of those guys isn't making the playoffs, at least one. So that'll be a very key storyline to see here going down the final stretch. And then, of course, you got, the overall final standings, which, of course, Minnesota and Denver and OKC fighting it out for the 1 seed. And then, of course, you're probably looking at a 4-5 matchup, which, we might get us another Clippers and Luka, Clippers versus Mavericks with Luka going against that team again here for the third time in the last few years. It's looking like it's probably going to be our 4-5 matchup in the West. So very interested to see how those West standings play out when it's all said and done. Then in the East, the area of the standings that I'm kind of mainly focused on right now is 3, 4, 5 seeds in the East. Now, you can kind of throw the 2 seed in there thanks to Milwaukee this last week, losing to all of the bottom feeders in the NBA. Raptors, Grizzlies, and I believe the Wizards, all 3 straight losses for them. Now, they had guys that were in and out of the lineup across all 3 of those games, so I won't hold it against them, entirely, but definitely not the stretch you want to have here as the season winds down. So you've got Orlando, New York, Cleveland. All 3 of those teams right there with each other, neck and neck. I believe Cleveland a game behind Orlando and New York. Orlando and New York tied right now for the 3 seed, but both of them also just a game out of the 2nd seed behind Milwaukee. So why is the actual seeding part of this important? One, if you're, the 3 seed, not only do you avoid, potentially seeing a Joel Embiid or a Miami Heat team, come out of the play-in and that be your matchup in the 2-7, you also are on the other side of the bracket from the Boston Celtics, who have been head and shoulders, running away with the Eastern Conference all year long in terms of regular season standing. So you avoid Boston in terms of not having to see them until potentially the conference finals. But then you also avoid one of those dark horses coming out of that play-in, getting themselves into playoff form. And then, of course, depending on if it's Orlando or, a team like the Knicks, I guess maybe more so the Knicks having Madison Square Garden to play in, having that home court not only in round 1, but potentially if you get one of those dark horse teams in round 2 after an upset, you get home court and you can kind of start cooking with gas a little bit in the first 2 rounds. So I think especially for a young team like Orlando, if they can hold on and finish 3 or even in some way climb up to 2, that's going to work wonders for them, not only just in terms of confidence this year, but that's going to lead to them being able to be major players coming into this upcoming offseason and continuing to build that team and round it into a true contender. So very interested to see how those standings play out in the East. The Knicks, love Jalen Brunson, love the season that they've had, but not having Julius Randle, as inconsistent as Julius Randle can be sometimes, that's definitely going to hurt them in the playoffs. And then, of course, if you're the 4 seed, I definitely think whoever between Orlando and New York gets that 4 seed, I do think they can beat Cleveland. Cleveland is a team that looks like they're in shambles right now coming down the stretch. I think they're going to beat whoever, that team is that matches up with Cleveland. I think they're going to beat Cleveland in the first round. You don't want to see Boston in the second round. You just don't want to do that to yourself. Give yourself some room for error and some room for optimism in terms of maybe they can, have a couple tough series in rounds 1 and 2 before you have to see them in the conference finals. So definitely think the standings are the most important thing right now on both conferences. And we got a lot of basketball to watch this week as everything plays out. You got a lot of guys playing for individual awards as well. MVP race, I guess, technically still a little bit up in the air, but I think that's ultimately going to be Jokic's award when it's all said and done. But you got guys trying to make all NBA first, second, and third team to, get those max contracts boosted a little bit. So a lot to play for both individually and from a team standpoint. And it's going to be some great basketball here down the stretch. Again, no basketball in the NBA tonight due to the NCAA final here this evening. But when play resumes tomorrow, man, you're going to see teams going extremely hard and trying to set themselves up for a potential championship run. So we'll be watching it all here this week on the Price Check. That'll do it for us today. Make sure, like, share, subscribe, turn the notifications on. Do it all as we continue to give you the basketball content that you need. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I am your host, Josh Price. Checking out.